Welcome to Victor English Story. The Garden Beneath the Fog. On the eastern edge of a quiet town called Belmere, there stood a house that no one could quite remember being built. It was not grand, nor especially beautiful, but it had an unusual stillness about it, as if time moved more carefully there. The roof was steep and dark with age. The windows were narrow and tall, and a stone wall enclosed the garden behind it so completely that no one in town had ever seen what grew inside. Children passing by the house on their way to school always lowered their voices. Shopkeepers glanced at its shuttered windows and quickly looked away. Travelers staying the night at the inn sometimes asked about it, and the locals would answer with the same uncertain shrug. "It belongs to Mara Vale," they would say. "And what does she do?" No one ever had a clear answer. Mara had lived there alone for as long as most people could remember. She came into town twice a month for flour, lamp oil, tea, and salt. She wore dark coats in winter, pale gray dresses in summer, and gloves almost all year round. She was not unfriendly, exactly, but she spoke as though words were things to be spent carefully. Her hair, once black, had gone silver early in life, and her eyes had the strange light color of rainwater in a stone basin. Some said she had once been a botanist in the capital. Others whispered that she had lost her husband and child in the same winter and had never recovered. A few, lowering their voices further, claimed that flowers grew in her garden which no one else had ever seen, flowers that opened only in fog and closed at the touch of direct sun. No one knew the truth. But every morning, before dawn had fully lifted, Mara stepped into her hidden garden with a lantern in one hand and a small brass key in the other. She moved through the narrow paths between flower beds like someone walking through a chapel. She touched leaves to test their health, trimmed damaged petals, checked the moss along the fountain, and unlocked the small glass house at the far end of the wall. The garden was unlike any other in Belmere. It was full not of bright summer color, but of pale, unusual beauty. White lilies with silver veins, tall blue flowers that looked almost transparent at their edges, clusters of tiny blossoms that glowed faintly in the first hour before sunrise. There were creeping vines with leaves like dark velvet and roses so soft in color they seemed made of mist. In the center stood an old pear tree, twisted and strong, and beneath it a circular stone bench covered in climbing ivy. Mara cared for the garden with a devotion that bordered on reverence. She spoke to the plants sometimes, though never loudly. She wrote notes in a leather journal with neat, slanted handwriting. Temperature, soil, bloom time, fragrance, reaction to shade, reaction to music. She recorded everything. Yet the most important pages in the journal were written in a code only she could understand. Because the garden was not merely a garden. Every flower in it had grown from a memory. Some had come from joy, some from grief, some from love so deep it had changed shape over the years and become something quieter, heavier, impossible to name. Mara had discovered this by accident long ago, on the worst morning of her life, and since then she had lived between wonder and sorrow, cultivating what no one else could see. The first flower had appeared 19 years earlier. It had been late autumn then, the season when the air in Belmere smelled of wet leaves and chimney smoke. Mara had been younger, married, and still foolish enough to believe that ordinary happiness could not be taken from her too quickly. Her husband, Elias, had laughed often and spoken to strangers as if they were old friends. Their daughter, Leora, was 6 and believed every bird in the world was carrying a message if one only listened carefully enough. Then fever came to Belmere. It moved house to house, street to street, with merciless patience. Some recovered. Many did not. Elias fell ill first, then Leora. Mara spent 12 days moving between their beds with cool cloths, broth, prayers, and the stubborn certainty that love alone must surely count for something against death. It did not. By the time the first winter fog rolled across the fields, both were gone. For weeks afterward, Mara walked through the rooms of the house like a ghost haunting her own life. She stopped answering the door. She let the fire burn low. She forgot to eat, forgot the hour, forgot the names of ordinary things. The world seemed built for other people, not for her. Even light felt cruel. One morning, unable to bear the silence indoors any longer, she went into the neglected back garden. It was small then, half wild, bordered by thorn bushes and broken stone. Fog lay over the ground in a thin, pale sheet. Near the old pear tree, she saw a flower blooming where there had been none before. It rose alone from the earth, delicate and white, with petals shaped like folded paper and a faint golden center. When Mara knelt beside it, a fragrance rose from the flower, not sweet, not sharp, but hauntingly familiar. It smelled like soap and cedarwood and cold winter air. It smelled like Elias. The moment she touched the petals, a memory passed through her so vividly that her breath caught in her throat. Elias standing in the kitchen doorway, sleeves rolled up, flour on his hands, pretending he knew how to bake bread and failing terribly. The sound of his laughter when she caught him stealing raisins from a bowl. The way he had looked at her across ordinary evenings, as if ordinary things were enough. The memory did not merely come to mind. It surrounded her. For one impossible second, she felt she was standing inside it. When she pulled her hand back, the vision faded. The flower trembled once in the fog, then held still. 3 days later, another appeared, this one small and blue, near the stone wall where Leora had once drawn birds in chalk. When Mara touched it, she heard her daughter's voice asking whether stars ever felt lonely in such a large sky. That was the beginning. Years passed. The garden grew. Mara learned, slowly, painfully, that the flowers emerged from memories she had thought buried too deep to survive. Some came after dreams, some after anniversaries, some after she found old objects she had hidden away and could not bear to throw out. A ribbon, a button, a letter, a wooden toy horse with one wheel missing. The stronger the memory, the stranger the bloom. She also learned that each flower held only one memory clearly. If she touched it too often, the petals would fade. If she neglected it, it would close and vanish into the soil. To preserve what the flowers carried, she had to care for them with great precision. So Mara devoted her life to the hidden garden. At first she did so because she could not endure another loss. Later, she did it because she had begun to understand that memory was not only a wound, it was also a form of shelter. One November afternoon, as fog thickened over Belmere and the bells of the church sounded dim and far away, a boy climbed over the back wall of Mara's garden. He was perhaps 14, thin as a reed, with dark hair falling into his eyes and mud on the knees of his trousers. He dropped awkwardly into a bed of moonflowers, winced, and immediately froze when he saw Mara standing 3 steps away holding a basket of cut stems. Neither of them spoke. The boy looked as if he expected shouting. Mara looked as if she expected an explanation. The garden around them breathed mist and silence. At last the boy said, "I'm sorry." "That is a poor method of entering private property," Mara replied. "I know. You have crushed 2 plants." I said I was sorry. She studied him. He was pale beneath the dirt on his face, and there was something raw in his expression, something beyond ordinary childish mischief. "Why are you here?" she asked. He hesitated. "I heard stories. Stories are usually a bad reason to climb walls." He swallowed. "My sister is sick." The words changed the air between them. Mara set down her basket. "What is your name?" "Jonah." "How old is your sister?" "She's 9. "9. And what do the stories have to do with her?" Jonah lifted his chin in a gesture that tried to look brave. "They say things grow here that don't grow anywhere else. They say you know how to keep people from disappearing." For the first time in many years, anger flashed through Mara so quickly it surprised her. Not at the boy, but at the town, at its careless rumors, at the way grief in others always seemed to awaken superstition in those who were helpless before it. "I do not heal the sick," she said sharply. Jonah's face fell, but he did not move. I thought maybe, he said quietly, if there was even a chance. His voice broke on the last word. Mara looked away. Beyond the wall, the town continued as always. Carts on the road, distant voices, the ordinary machinery of lives not yet interrupted. She remembered too well what it was to stand at the edge of losing someone and be willing to believe anything, ask anything, become foolish in public if foolishness might purchase one more day. What is wrong with her? Mara asked more gently now. Jonah rubbed at his sleeve. Her lungs. She's been ill since spring. Some days she's better. Some days she can't climb the stairs without stopping twice. The doctor says winter will be hard. Mara was silent. The boy's gaze drifted across the garden, not with greed or curiosity now, but with the fragile, painful hope of someone who has already been disappointed too often. My mother said not to bother you, he added. She said people should be left alone when they choose it. But I thought if I asked myself. He looked down. I don't know. I thought maybe you'd understand. That, unfortunately, was true. Mara bent and rescued the damaged moonflower vine as best she could. Then she straightened. I cannot cure your sister, she said. But if you came for understanding, that is a different matter. Jonah blinked. What does that mean? It means, Mara said, that if you're going to ruin my flower beds, you may at least earn the privilege properly. Come back tomorrow. Use the gate. He stared at her. You mean it? Yes, and wash your boots first. The next afternoon, Jonah returned, cleaner but no less anxious. Mara let him in through the green side gate and led him through the garden without explanation. The fog was low that day, pearl gray and soft, turning the flowers into blurred shapes of color. Jonah looked around with open astonishment. It's bigger than it looks from outside. Most important things are, Mara said. She took him first to the pear tree, then to the glass house, then to the narrow bed of pale blue flowers that opened only in cold air. Jonah asked dozens of questions. Mara answered few of them directly. She had almost forgotten what it was like to have another voice in the garden. At last they reached the circular stone bench. Sit, she said. Jonah obeyed. Mara remained standing. You came here because you are afraid. Yes. That fear is trying to convince you that if you search hard enough, somewhere there must be a hidden answer that no one else has found. He looked startled. Maybe. There often isn't. His face tightened. But, she continued, that does not mean there is nothing to do. She crossed to a flower growing near the bench. It was small, pale gold, and half hidden beneath fern leaves. This, she said, grew from the memory of a morning when my daughter laughed so hard at breakfast that milk came out of her nose. Jonah stared at her, uncertain whether she was joking. I am serious, Mara said. He looked at the flower again. Ow, I don't know entirely. I only know that grief leaves openings in the world, and sometimes strange things take root there. Jonah frowned. So these are all memories? Yes. Of people you lost. Some. Not all. Loss is not the only thing that grows. He was quiet for a long time. Can I touch it? He asked. Mara hesitated. She had never allowed anyone else to touch the flowers. The garden was the last country of her private sorrow. Yet the boy's voice held no greed, only wonder. Gently, she said. Jonah reached out and brushed the pale gold petals with his fingertips. He inhaled sharply. What did you see? Mara asked. He blinked several times, as if returning from a distance. A little girl at a table, he whispered. Sunlight. Someone laughing. Mara nodded once. It felt real, he said. It was. He looked up at her with an expression she could not immediately name. Reverence, perhaps, or simply the shock of discovering that the world was stranger and softer than he had believed. For the next several weeks, Jonah returned often. Sometimes he brought apples from the market or fresh bread from his mother's oven in awkward payment for Mara's tolerance. Sometimes he helped weed the pathways or carry water from a pump. Slowly, without either of them deciding it openly, he became part of the garden's routine. He spoke of his sister, Ellen, constantly. How she loved stories about ships, though she had never seen the sea. How she hated broth, but drank it without complaint when their mother looked tired. How she insisted on keeping a feather under her pillow because she believed it helped her dream of flying. Mara listened more than she spoke, but she remembered everything. One evening, as dusk deepened and the first frost silvered the edges of the leaves, Jonas said, "If a person dies, does a flower always grow?" Mara did not answer immediately. "No," she said at last. "Not always, and not at once." "Then how do you know which memories matter enough?" She turned toward him. "They all matter. The question is which ones we are brave enough to keep alive." The boy lowered his eyes. Winter arrived early that year. Cold settled over Belmere with unusual force. The ponds froze. Chimneys smoked from dawn to midnight. People walked quickly through the streets with scarves over their mouths and shoulders hunched against the wind. Mara saw less of Jonah for a time. When he came, he looked thinner. His words became more scattered, his hands restless. "Ellen had another bad night," he said once, standing in the garden with snow caught in his hair. "She couldn't stop coughing." Another day, "The doctor says we should keep her warm, but the fire won't stay strong unless we use more coal, and we can't afford more coal until market day." And another, "She asked whether spring remembers the houses it promised to return to." Mara felt each sentence land inside her like a stone. One night, unable to sleep, she walked the garden in darkness with her lantern held low. Snow lined the wall in thin ridges. Most of the flowers had closed against the cold, but a few winter blooms remained open, pale and luminous in the fog. Mara stopped beneath the pear tree and stood there for a long time, listening to the silence. She had guarded this place for years, as if secrecy itself were sacred. Perhaps it had been. But secrecy had also become a habit, and habits, when left alone too long, could disguise themselves as necessity. The next morning, she went into town. People stared, because Mara almost never came on market day. She ignored them all and walked straight to the small house near the mill, where Jonah lived with his mother and sister. Jonah opened the door and looked as though he thought he was dreaming. Dreaming. "Mara, are you going to leave me standing in the cold?" He stepped aside so fast he nearly tripped. The house was poor but clean. The curtains were mended carefully. A kettle steamed on the stove. In the corner, beside the small fire, a little girl lay sleeping in a chair with blankets tucked around her and one small hand curled near her cheek. Ellen. She was more fragile looking than Mara had expected, all narrow wrists and hollowed eyes, but there was intelligence in her face even in sleep. On the table beside her sat a feather. Jonah's mother came from the back room, wiping her hands on her apron, and stopped short. "Mrs. Vale," she said, stunned. "I didn't know." "Neither did I," Mara said. "Not until this morning." The woman, whose name was Ruth, glanced from Mara to Jonah and understood more than was spoken. "If he's been bothering you." "He has," Mara said, "frequently, but I have decided to permit it." To her surprise, Ruth laughed. It was tired laughter, but real. Something in the room eased. Mara stepped closer to Ellen's chair. "When she wakes," Mara said, "if she is strong enough, I would like to invite her to see the garden." Ruth stared. "Your garden?" "Yes." "No one sees your garden." "I'm aware of my own habits. Thank you." Ruth's eyes filled suddenly with tears she tried and failed to hide. "That's very kind," she said softly. "It is not kindness," Mara answered, though even she knew that was no longer entirely true. 2 days later, wrapped in blankets and escorted by Jonah, as if she were a queen crossing dangerous territory, Ellen came through the gate. She stopped after 3 steps and simply looked. The fog was light that day, and the winter flowers were in bloom. White bells trembling on silver stems, low violet clusters bright against dark earth, frost roses opening like quiet stars. "It's alive," Ellen whispered. "Most gardens are," Mara said. Ellen smiled without taking her eyes off the flowers. "No, I mean, alive in the way stories are." Mara did not know how to answer that. Ellen visited whenever she was able through the rest of winter. She did not have Jonah's restless energy. She moved slowly, spoke softly, and noticed everything. She asked the names of plants, listened carefully to the answers, and invented better names when she disliked the real ones. She called the pale silver lily Moon Breath and the tiny blue glasshouse bloom Sky Ink. Mara pretended to disapprove and secretly wrote both names into her journal. The children changed the garden. There was more laughter now, more muddy footprints, more questions asked at inconvenient moments. Mara found herself baking small honey biscuits because Ellen liked them and Jonah ate anything set before him. Sometimes, standing at the kitchen window and watching brother and sister move between the flower beds, she felt something in herself shifting, something stiff and long frozen beginning cautiously to thaw. Then came the hardest night of the season. Wind battered Belmere from the north. Ice formed along the inside edges of old windows. Just after midnight, there was a pounding at Mara's door. She opened it to find Jonah breathless, wild-eyed, and half-frozen. "It's Ellen," he gasped. "She can't breathe right. Mother sent for the doctor, but he's at the next town and the road's nearly blocked. Please just come." Mara did not ask why he had come to her. Fear does not reason in clean lines. She took her coat, lantern, and a jar of crushed herbs for steam and followed him into the storm. By the time they reached the house, Ellen was struggling for each breath. Ruth knelt beside her, trying to keep calm and failing. Mara moved quickly, setting water to boil, warming cloths, raising the child's shoulders, speaking in a voice firmer than she felt. Hours seemed to gather and stretch. The doctor did not arrive. Near dawn, Ellen's eyes found Mara's. "Is the garden awake?" she whispered. Mara swallowed. "Not yet. It is waiting for spring." Ellen's breathing hitched. "Tell it, I like the silver ones." "I will." The room grew terribly still. Ruth made a sound Mara would remember for the rest of her life. Outside, dawn came gray and merciless over the frozen town. 3 mornings later, after Belmere had buried another small grief beneath hard winter soil, Mara went into her garden before sunrise. The fog was thick. Her lantern cast only a pale circle around her feet. Near the pear tree, where no flower had stood the day before, a new bloom had opened. It was unlike any Mara had seen. Its petals were thin as frost, nearly transparent, with a heart of soft silver blue. It seemed to hold light inside itself, not brightly, but with a tender, steady glow. When Mara knelt beside it, tears rose before she had even touched it. She knew. Still, she laid her fingertips against the petals. At once the memory blossomed around her, not of death, but of life. Ellen standing in the winter garden with blankets around her shoulders, face lifted toward the pale flowers, smiling as if she had discovered a country no one else had thought to map. Ellen saying, "It's alive in the way stories are." Mara bowed her head. When Jonah came that afternoon, he found her sitting on the stone bench beneath the pear tree. "There's a new one," he said quietly. "Yes." He stepped toward it slowly. Slowly, as though approaching something holy and painful at once. "Is it hers?" "Yes." He stood very still, then crouched beside the bloom. His hand trembled, but he did not touch it yet. "What if I can't?" he asked. "You can." "What if it hurts too much?" "It will," Mara said, "and it will be worth it." He looked at her, eyes shining with tears he no longer bothered to hide. Then he touched the petals. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he was crying openly, but there was wonder in his grief. "She was laughing," he whispered. Mara nodded. For a long while they remained there in silence, the winter flower glowing faintly between them as fog drifted through the garden walls. Spring came slowly after that. Snow withdrew. The earth softened. Belmere began again its yearly habit of surviving. Ruth continued on with the quiet bravery of the bereaved. Jonah grew taller, leaner, steadier. He came to the garden not because he was desperate now, but because he understood it. Years later, people in town would say the old house changed after the children came. Its shutters opened more often. Music was sometimes heard from the back room. Flowers began appearing in pots on the front steps, as if a hidden abundance had finally overflowed the wall. As for Mara, she remained its keeper, but she no longer believed the garden existed only for the dead. It was for the living as well, for those who feared forgetting, for those who needed proof that love outlasted disappearance, for those who could not carry memory alone. And on certain mornings, when the fog lay low and pearl gray over Belmere, if one stood very quietly outside the stone wall, it was said that a fragrance would drift through the air unlike any ordinary flower. Not just sweet, not just strange, but familiar in some private, aching way. As if somewhere beyond sight, a garden was blooming with everything the heart had refused to lose.